Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. In this episode, recorded on August 16th, 2014, Daniel and I spoke with Mr. Scott Horton about Iraq, ISIS, and Syria. Mr. Horton is the host of the Scott Horton Show, which mostly focuses on topics related to foreign policy. You can follow his work and listen to his show at scotthorton.org, with Scott spelled S-C-O-T-T. You can listen to his show through the Liberty Radio Network at lrn.fm, by subscribing on iTunes and through several other media outlets. You can find a full list of where to listen to The Scott Horton Show by going to scotthorton.org/listen. For more information, please see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/ISIS-Syria-Iraq.
Okay, so we're just going to jump right in. So today we're going to try to talk about Iraq, Syria, ISIS, and all of the very interesting stuff that's going on in that part of the world. And we kind of want to start with the Sinjar Mountain situation. So what is/was occurring there, and why is the U.S. intervening in that area?
Okay, well, what had happened was there were some Yazidis who are a tribe of, they're basically Zoroastrians, although they mix some other kind of, Christian and Islamic beliefs as well in their group. They're a small ethnic religious sect. And Mount Sinjar is basically their home. And now the stories were that, as many as 100,000 of them were there and all completely surrounded by ISIS. So they never really explain how come ISIS can't climb the mountain after them. They're just waiting at the bottom or something. Anyway, turns out a lot of it was PR. The Kurds have a great PR firm in New York that was helping put out a lot of this. And what had happened was there actually were, I don't know, maybe 10 or 20,000, and but quite a few of those escaped with the help of the PKK communist group of Kurdish rebels, helped them escape up into the territory and safe into Kurdistan. But they sent in the special forces, I believe, arrived on either Monday or Tuesday and talked with the Yazidis, and they said, well, yeah, most of the people who wanted to escape have already escaped, and those of us who are still here, we want to stay here. So it was not the situation like they had said where they were completely under siege and ISIS was about to kill them all and this kind of thing. They had food, they had water, which I guess they needed some aid. But in other words, so, there was a molehill, a pretty severe molehill, but they made it into a mountain in order to justify American intervention, which is the second part of your question. Why is America intervening there? It is not to protect the Yazidis. It is to protect Erbil, the capital of Kurdistan, where there's a significant American military, CIA, and oil company presence there. It would have been, the Benghazi massacre times 100 or something like that of dead Americans if ISIS had taken Erbil. Now, I don't think they were actually really going to try to take Erbil. Now, maybe they were going to try to take every town on the road to Erbil, between Erbil and Mosul, but that is Kurdish territory where they will stand and fight for it, and probably, succeed in being able to hold their own town. It's a town of 1.2 million or something like that, and so I don't think ISIS would have had much of a chance of taking Erbil in the first place, and I think they would have known that. But the Americans intervened, and that became the pretext. And, really is amazing. I think we got to really pause and take note of how quickly they were able to. And I don't know if most Americans even know about this, even were paying attention at all. They sort of made not that big of a deal out of it. They said, we're going to go to protect the Yazidis on the mountain. Oh, and we're drawing a red line around Erbil. That was last Thursday. Then on Friday, they said, oh, also we're drawing a red line around Baghdad and Shiistan. Of course, we'll protect them from ISIS too. And then the next day, on Saturday, Obama said, we will not allow there to be a safe haven for these terrorists. Now, that doesn't just mean, we will bomb them out of power. One day soon, we will make sure that somebody else rules Mosul, not them. Something, right? Because, okay, fine, you could maybe sack Mosul, hire, I don't know, Blackwater to go in there and sack Mosul and drive ISIS out of Mosul. So then you can say they're not a state anymore, but you just turn them back into an insurgency again. The entire Marine Corps fought these guys for 6 years straight and weren't able to make them disappear. The closest thing they were able to get to that was bribing the local Sunnis to turn on them and marginalize them. But they weren't able to get rid of them. After all, here they are again. ISIS is just Al-Qaeda in Iraq a few years later. And so what they're saying is, we'll deny them a safe haven. Well, geez, it kept us in Afghanistan an extra 6 years on the theory that even according to them, there were only 50 Al-Qaeda guys on both sides of the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. As long as there are 50 Arabs anywhere near the Durand line, we have to stay in Afghanistan, they said. Otherwise, safe haven. Well, now they're saying that the entire Sunni triangle in Iraq and plus now all of eastern Syria must be free of angry Sunnis with rifles and or, equipment to make homemade mines out of. Absolutely impossible mission. Absolute full-scale blank check. Gulf of Tonkin on steroids, authorization for war that you could drive an entire new Iraq war through. And as the Pentagon has already said, air power isn't going to get rid of these guys. Yeah, we know that, which is why, of course, the Marines and the Army are coming next, certainly before New Year's. You'll have, not just special forces, but you'll have infantry and Marine Corps on the ground going toe-to-toe with ISIS, because how can they resist?
So where did ISIS come from? How did they form?
Well, you know what? Tonight I've got to get to work and edit this great article, and it'll be published tomorrow Monday on antiwar.com, all about the rise of ISIS that this guy wrote that I think you'll really like. So check antiwar.com Monday for a real good background. But the very short story of it is this. There were no Al-Qaeda in Iraq before America invaded in 2003. The closest thing they had was Colin Powell used Abu Musab al-Zarqawi as his talking point in the UN speech in February of 2003. And he lied. And he said, Zarqawi is buddies with Osama and he's buddies with Saddam. He's the link between the two. That's what you need to know. Well, he was technically right that Zarqawi was in Iraq, but he was in Kurdistan, safe up in the protected autonomous north, on the north side of the no-fly, no-drive zone that had been imposed by America and Britain since 1991 and the failed uprising. And so, that was basically American-held territory already. And then he wasn't friends with Osama. He had told Osama, no, I don't want to work with you in attacking America. I want to kill the King of Jordan. He's my focus, and I have my own group, and I don't want to merge my group with yours. So piss off. And then Saddam, I don't know if Zarqawi had ever talked to Saddam, but I do know that Saddam had put a death warrant on him and had told the Mukhabarat, you find this guy and kill him because he was a very dangerous jihadist. And then the Weekly Standard, you might even remember this back in 2003, the Weekly Standard and Dick Cheney and the neocons had this whole theory that Saddam had given Zarqawi a peg leg. Remember that? They claimed that he had lost his leg and Saddam had operated on him. They had this whole story about how they were buddies and he had been in the hospital in Baghdad and got a new fake peg leg from Saddam and all this. It was a total lie, of course. And in fact, I'm going on too long. Sorry, I'll try to hurry. But the American military begged George Bush before the invasion in March, between February and March, in fact, going through back into the late 2002, the military begged George Bush to let them go to Kurdistan and kill Zarqawi. He had this tiny little group, this tiny little base up in Kurdistan of his little group, Ansar al-Sharia, and the Pentagon said, let us go and kill this guy before the war starts. Because if the war starts and he's on the loose, they knew enough about him already. This guy is going to be a major threat to us. And George Bush told him no because he needed his talking point because he's a liar. He was trying to start a war. And so, bring him on. We're not afraid, blah, blah, blah. Well, so then America invaded. And then immediately, almost immediately, the Shiite leaders said, democracy, huh? One man, one vote. Well, they're 60%. Democracy means the Shiites win. And America chose the worst parties among the Shiites, those who are most tied to Iran and those who are least interested in having any kind of friendly coalition with the former Sunni-dominated government at all. And so Muqtada al-Sadr, for example, wanted to compromise with the Sunnis. But Bush chose the Dawa Party and the Supreme Islamic Council, who basically just wanted to take Baghdad and all the land between Baghdad and Basra and call it Shiistan and run off with it in alliance with Iran and go ahead and let Fallujah and Mosul and the Anbar province more or less go, the Sunni triangle go, because what's the point of trying to rule them? So they called it strong federalism, but what they really meant was tear Iraq to pieces. And those are the guys America supported because they needed us. And even though they were closer with Iran, the Americans made the bet that they're going to end up with us. Well, anyway, so America fought a 5-year civil war, killed 1 million people to give the Shiite parties Baghdad. And in response to that, there was, and there's more to it than that, all the attacks on Fallujah and everything else. But in response to that, the Sunni insurgents, the Sunni tribal leaders and religious leaders of Iraq basically made an agreement with Zarqawi and allowed him to come to the fore and use his group to attack the Shia, the Iranian and American-backed Shia who were coming to power. But his policy was to create a sectarian civil war. He wanted everything. He had a much longer game in mind than them. He wanted a full-scale Sunni Shia civil war for the whole region, and the Americans and the Iranians were happy to oblige him as much as they could. And so he targeted markets and mosques and killed women and children, did everything he could to provoke the Shiite militias into responding to rally then more Sunnis to his cause. That's how terrorism works. But he hadn't done the math. The Shiites were the 60%. They were guaranteed to win, especially with the Army and the Marine Corps fighting on their side, and the Americans. And so the Sunnis ended up, well, I'm skipping ahead, but he finally declared himself Al-Qaeda only at the end of 2004, 1 year and 9 months into the occupation, before he declared his goals in line with Osama bin Laden and his loyalty to Al-Qaeda. So then they became Al-Qaeda in Iraq, America's enemy all the way through, about halfway through 2007. Before the local Sunnis turned on them and marginalized them. But then came, a lot of this history. America finally left the war and all that. There was more or less stasis as the civil war for the Shiites had been won by America. So America withdraws. But then in 2011, because of the inflation that America created to pay for the war, it destabilized the whole region and led to the Arab Spring. And in Libya and Syria, the two countries, well, Gaddafi was our friend, but only kind of and expendable. Syria, America, well, he would torture Al-Qaeda guys for us, but was no real loyal ally and obviously a major enemy of the Israelis. And so the Americans decided that they would support the Arab Spring revolutions, not in Egypt against our friend Mubarak, but in Libya and Syria. And especially in Syria, it turned into a Mujahideen war almost immediately. And the Saudis, the Qataris, the Turks, and the Jordanians, under the auspices and under the control and direction of the CIA, had supported from 2011 all the way really through this year and continuing, have supported the rebellion in Syria. And now the rebellion in Syria is basically what we call the Sunni-based insurgency plus Al-Qaeda in Iraq during the Iraq War. It's the same damn thing, only this time on the Syrian side of the border. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was actually made up of a lot of Syrians. Well, in Syria, they're called the Al-Nusra Front. And then ISIS is basically just a break off of that. This is all still Zarqawi's group, basically, the remnants of it. And the only difference between ISIS and al-Nusra is that ISIS decided, this guy Baghdadi decided he didn't want to take orders from Ayman al-Zawahiri hiding in his mom's basement in Pakistan anymore because he had his own ideas. And Zawahiri's so far away, why obey? That kind of thing. And in fact, Zarqawi, when he split off, Zarqawi sent his personal representative to Syria to negotiate and to try to work things out and to bring ISIS and Nusra back together again. Well, ISIS suicide bombed him and killed him. A guy who was like one of bin Laden's right-hand men going all the way back to the Afghan war in the 80s. And ISIS suicide bombed him and, basically told Zarqawi, screw you, old man, we'll do what we want. And what's funny is Zarqawi's order was, I'm sorry, I said Zarqawi. I mean Zawahiri, bin Laden's right-hand man, the surgeon, the Egyptian surgeon hiding in Pakistan. He said, go back to Iraq. Your tactics in Syria are too extreme. Go back to Iraq. And he said, no. And then like 3 months later, he goes back to Iraq and takes the entire Sunni triangle, conquers it, declares it the caliphate, and himself the leader of all Sunnis in the world. Holy crap. So now ISIS really is a country. And here's one more thing I'll say before I finally shut up, is that ISIS is a state right now. They're surrounded by enemies. They have the Shia from Baghdad to Basra. They've got the Iranians. They've got the Turks. They've got the what's left of The government of Syria, the country, the western half of the country, they still mostly control. They got Jordan, Egypt, Saudi. I mean, they've been backing them, the Saudis, but they're scared of them too. They don't want them coming south. So they're surrounded by enemies, but none of their enemies have the ability to really do anything about it. Maybe the Turks do, but I don't think they're going to invade. They've been helping support this thing all this time, going along with the Saudis. And so right now, the Islamic State is really taking the opportunity to consolidate the territory that they've already got. They're not flinging themselves headlong into Shiite-controlled Baghdad and dying. They're not flinging themselves headlong into American-protected Erbil and dying. They're taking on the Syrian army in limited measure, but mostly they're working on consolidating their state, pumping oil, selling it, getting electricity out of their dams, filling potholes, taking over all the local court systems and everything they can, and they're building a country. I mean, it really is right now fair to say that Iraq no longer exists. There's Shiistan, Kurdistan, and the new Islamic State, which takes up what we used to call the Sunni Triangle and pretty much the eastern half of Syria right now. That border, that old Sykes-Picot border from after World War I is over.
So speaking of this kind of fractured Iraq, there's a new prime minister now. Al-Maliki is no longer in there. He's been kicked out. So why did the U.S. back a new prime minister, and what do you think this change of power what effect is it going to have on the state of affairs?
The whole thing is just a pipe dream, I think. I mean, I don't know everything about the individual guy, Abadi, but it doesn't matter. It's old boss, same as the new boss. He comes from the Dawa party. Like I was saying before, America picked the pro-separatist Shiite parties because they needed us. Sadr wanted to hold the country together, kick the Iranians and the Americans out. So the Americans called him the enemy, chased him into Iran even. But it was the Dawa party and the Supreme Islamic Council who always wanted to break Iraq up and really turn it into what we got now. And so, Maliki is just being replaced. It's like replacing Obama with Biden or Obama with Hillary. He comes from the exact same party. And he comes from an agreement, again, between the Americans and the Iranians over who's going to be the new prime minister. And that's why Maliki left. It's not because Obama told him to go. It's because the Iranians told him to go. And when the Iranian support for him was dried up, and the Ayatollah Sistani especially had said, you have no more legitimacy, pal, hit the road, then, his days are up. But now, so what's the point of trying to bring in the new guy? The point of trying to bring in the new guy is to try to replicate half the surge, preferably from their point of view, from the empire's point of view, not the extra 30,000 troops part, but the part where they bribe the Sunni tribal and religious leaders into marginalizing Al-Qaeda in Iraq. But here's the problem. Back in 2006 and 7, the Sunni tribal leaders were way more powerful than Al-Qaeda in Iraq already. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was, 5, at the very, very most 10%. But no, probably more like 5, 7 or something percent of the Sunni-based insurgency. And they got the headlines because they bombed the marketplaces full of women and children and that kind of thing with the suicide attacks and all of that. But they were the helpers of the Iraqi Sunni-based insurgency that allowed them to exist as long as it was convenient for them. But that situation has changed. The Islamic State is the Islamic State. And so far, at least, any of the tribal leaders who decided that, you know what, I don't like you guys and I don't want to go along with you, have been hunted down and killed. And they have learned their lessons from Zarqawi and his successors' failures in, angering the local Sunni population so much that they got rid of them. That, well, we're just going to make sure we're powerful enough they can't get rid of us. And so, and you look back at what happened, there was a surge. There were already 100,000 troops in the country. They brought it up to 130,000, and pretty much, more or less, that extra 30,000 went straight to working directly with the former Sunni-based insurgency they'd just been fighting against that small percentage of the Islamic State, helped with, a blank check of hundreds of billions of dollars, or, tens of billions of dollars that Petraeus used to buy off the tribal leaders and to arm them up with what it took to hunt down the leaders of Al-Qaeda and kill them. And so to try to replicate that situation right now is basically out of the question. And they're talking as though, in fact, go back to 2007 again. When they announced the surge, they said, we're going to meet all these benchmarks. The point of the surge is not to pacify the Sunni insurgency. We're bribing them, but we need to pacify Baghdad. We need to basically end create a sound enough security situation in Baghdad that the parliament can meet in peace and quiet and can negotiate out the major remaining issues. Well, that never happened. Oh, the surge worked, the surge worked, the surge worked. They said it 10 million times as though that made it true. But the definition of whether it worked or not was whether it met the benchmarks or not. And it never met the benchmarks, not at all. They created peace and quiet in Baghdad after kicking all the Sunnis out of it with drill holes in their skulls. But they never made the agreements that it would have taken for the 20% Sunni minority that used to rule the whole country to be happy with their new lot, and which would have taken a lot. Bringing them into the military, bringing them into the army and all the other patronage, and basically bribing them enough that they would not ever want to join up with ISIS or anything like it. Now here we are, we're halfway through 2014. It's been years and years and years of the Maliki government acting like exactly what the critics said it would do, which is just take all the land from Baghdad to Basra and try to keep their alliance with the Kurds, but basically tell the Sunnistan to go get bent. Your problem isn't my problem. And of course, it blew up in his face, and he ended up losing power because of just how big and bad the ISIS revolution has been. But that really pretty much was the game plan all along. And you could go back and read Robert Dreyfus and Patrick Coburn and all these writers going back 10 years, literally going back 2002, 2003, even before the war, 2003, 2004, 2005, saying America is picking the leaders most likely to split Iraq apart just because they need us. But just wait and watch, because if you want to be an imperial power and control a foreign government, it makes a lot more sense to prop up a minority that needs you. But once America put in the Shiite majority in power in Baghdad, they said, okay, now don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. Thanks for losing 4,500 guys fighting for us, killing 1 million people to give us the capital city. Now you can go, because they're the majority, the 60% majority. They got their alliance with the Kurds, the other 20%, and their alliance with the Iranians next door. And so, if ruling all the Sunni triangle was their game, they blew it. But it never was their game. They were the separatists. They were the ones, all they wanted was the capital city. That was what the Iraq war was really about. The American war in Iraq was really about just giving the capital city to the Shiites.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Syria now. We keep hearing about this Free Syrian Army. Who is the Free Syrian Army, and how many weapons and how much financial support have they received from the U.S.?
Well, there's hardly a Free Syrian Army at all. How many members it's ever had, I don't know. I mean, at the end of last December, they were chased all the way into Turkey. I've spoken with, a couple of my favorite reporters. They're not libertarian ideologues. They're just reporters, but damn good ones from McClatchy newspapers, Mitchell Prothero and Jonathan Landay. They both say that, there is a Free Syrian Army, but it's really small, and they're basically just gangsters and criminals and nobodies. And Landay said he's seen the CIA training these guys in northern Jordan, and he said that they amount to, after all this time, they amount to basically an auxiliary border guard, because America's policy toward Assad ever since 2011, in many ways, has served to isolate him so badly that there's a giant wide open border between Syria and Jordan left over. So America's trained up this, the moderates, basically just to try to keep ISIS out of Jordan. And they're not doing much more than that. In the other towns in the east where America has gone in and tried to support this group and that group, all they ended up doing really was supporting them enough to keep Assad out, but not nearly enough to keep ISIS out. It would have taken American soldiers on the ground to keep ISIS out compared to the moderates they've been backing. So all across eastern, through the whole countryside, all the little towns and villages and whatever have been completely run over by the Islamic State. And where the al-Nusra Front has been trying to fight the Assad government this whole time. ISIS is only just starting to do that. They've basically been too smart to take on the state army this whole time. They've just basically been working on consolidating all the lawless land in the east and taking it over for themselves. So, in other words, the Free Syrian Army, whatever aid America has given them, whatever guns, whatever anti-tank missiles or anything else, virtually all of it just ends up in the hands of the al-Nusra Front and the Islamic State, and has all along. This is a huge project that goes back to 2011. As soon as Gaddafi was gone, they started a major project to bring as much of his... Well, first of all, I think they wanted to find all the shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles and get rid of those. They were scared of the Mujahideen getting their hands on those. But they wanted to, because of airliners, that close to Europe and Israel. But what they really wanted to do was give everything else that they could to the Mujahideen war going on in Syria. And then you had Saudi was basically back in this group called Arar al-Sham, more than others. The Turks tended to favor the al-Nusra Front. The Qataris tended to favor ISIS, supposedly. And the CIA is helping coordinate all of this and bring in, guns from Eastern Europe and this and that. And basically the policy has been that Israel hates Assad, and so America hates Assad. And so we want to get rid of Assad. Now, from my point of view, Assad might as well be Mossad. This guy, if the three of us were in charge of running Israel right now, we could not possibly do better than a secular fascist dictator who represents basically a coalition of minority groups to keep the Sunni supermajority down in Syria and keep everything calm. He hadn't made a peep about the Golan Heights this whole time since his dad died. I mean, he may as well have been made in an Israeli laboratory, this guy. But no, good enough isn't good enough for them ever. He still has a state army, and he's backed by Iran. And he helps back Hezbollah. They hate Hezbollah, and so he's got to go. And I swear, I couldn't make this up, guys. I mean, it sounds like a damn lie to me, but I know that it's true because it's a real thing. Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador, told the Jerusalem Post last October that from the very beginning of this thing, Israeli policy has been, we want Assad gone. And then he explained, in a battle between these bad guys and those bad guys, those meaning Al-Qaeda suicide bombers who cut their prisoners' heads off and crucify them to death and kill children for fun. Between these guys and those guys, I prefer those guys because these bad guys are backed by Iran. Hezbollah, which are basically like cute little cupcakes compared to ISIS, right? Hezbollah, which is basically not even really a terrorist group these days as much as it is just a local grassroots sub-state militia in southern Lebanon that is no offensive threat to Israel whatsoever. That has, I don't know, they certainly have no heavy weapons or real armor or anything. They're mostly armed with AKs and maybe some kind of medium weight machine guns or something. But this is the force that is so terrible that they prefer Al-Qaeda. And then he just said the same thing. Michael Oren said the same thing to Jeffrey Goldberg at the Aspen Institute. You can look it up on YouTube. Just type in Oren, O-R-E-N, Sunnis, and Aspen, and it'll come right up. And there he explains. And Jeffrey Goldberg, the hawk, former Israeli prison guard, writer for The Atlantic, is sitting there shading his eyes and shaking his head and can't believe it. As Oren, and it's funny because he keeps saying, I'm only speaking for myself here now, okay? I'm not speaking for Israel. But the Israeli position is we prefer Al-Qaeda and ISIS to Assad. We prefer, I know they're bad guys, but we prefer the Mujahideen to anybody backed by Iran. And so maybe that makes sense to the Israelis. It shouldn't. It's crazy. But it certainly shouldn't make sense to American foreign policy when Al-Qaeda is our enemy. Al-Qaeda are the guys who knocked down our buildings and killed 3,000 of our people and tried 10 years before that to knock down one tower into the other, who blew up the Khobar Towers barracks in Saudi Arabia, who blew up our embassies in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya, who tried once and succeeded the second time at attacking an American battleship off the coast of Yemen. And these are the, you know what? They never have attacked Tel Aviv. So I guess I can see why Michael Oren and Benjamin Netanyahu aren't too worried about it. But the idea that Americans would support the Mujahideen, the bin Ladenites, against Assad just because that's what Israel wants, it's treason. It's high treason in the worst way. And I don't care about what any stupid Republican said about this stupid Benghazi faux scandal or any of that. I'm not talking about that. And I'm not saying that Barack Obama is some, Islamic, commie, Black Panther revolutionary, usurper, traitor to America, or any of that birther crap either. I'm saying he is a white, conservative, moderate, centrist, nationalist, imperialist. And he thinks that he's zooming the Mujahideen when really he's the one being zoomed. But for him to even think that he can use them to accomplish even some short-term goal, like help get rid of Gaddafi, help get rid of Assad, is high treason. He belongs under the supermax. It's as simple as that. His entire National Security Council are guilty of providing aid and comfort to the enemy, constitutional definition of treason. And it's their fault that what's going on in Iraq is going on right now. Maliki did tell the Sunnis, you guys can all go to hell and all that. And he made his bed, and now he's got to lie in a big way. But America and American policy in Syria has just, multiplied the Iraqi government's problems and the Iraqi people's problems by 10,000 times over the last 3 years. Over and over again, Obama told the rebels, don't deal with Assad. Don't talk to Assad. You don't have to talk to the government until Assad steps down, right? Which is, of course, a non-starter, an absolute deal breaker. And Assad said, let's negotiate. Let's all go to Geneva. Let's negotiate. How are you going to negotiate with a bunch of Saudi-backed Mujahideen suicide bombers? You can't bring them to Geneva. But then so you get the moderate council as best you can to try to come up with some kind of compromise. Nope. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are standing there with their arms crossed saying, you do not have to talk to this government as long as Assad is in charge of it. So they have prolonged this thing and prolonged this thing. They've sent no one knows how many tens of millions of dollars worth of just straight dollars and weapons to these guys. And all along, guys, this is no hindsight 2020. All along, in print, on my radio show, and all over the place, great journalists like Patrick Coburn, et cetera, have been warning about exactly what's going on here, who is getting the weapons. Moderates don't fight in a volunteer insurgency against a fascist dictator like this. You know who volunteers to fight? Extremists. That's who. Mujahideen, who don't mind dying. They're the ones who go up against Assad, a fascist dictator like this, in a war like this. The moderates are a bunch of big, fat CIA expats sitting at a five-star hotel in the Gulf somewhere. They're not doing no damn fighting. It's this whole time. In fact, I even have a soundbite here I could play if you wanted me to, of Hillary Clinton 2 years ago saying she's being attacked by CBS, saying, how come we're not doing more to serve Israel here? And she says, well, because Zawahiri supports the war in Syria. Are we backing Al-Qaeda in Syria? Hamas supports the rebellion in Syria. Are we backing Hamas? And she goes on to say, there are no good people to set up as the new government instead if we wanted to. There are no real credible people. This is her explaining exactly why not to do what she continued to do for the next couple of years. And then she resigned because Obama wouldn't do it even more. And she went and blabbed to the New York Times then, and now she's repeating the same thing to Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic just in this last week. She wanted to arm the rebels more, but Obama wouldn't let her. Ah!
So how do you think this is going to end up playing out in Syria?
How
is this all going to end?
I think the U.S. Army and Marine Corps are going to full-scale invade the Sunni Triangle and eastern Syria and conquer it because there's nobody else who can do it, and because the American national security state will not leave horrible enough alone. They just can't. And, it's true that, yes, the policy has been, take Iran down a peg. Again, Jeffrey Goldberg, Obama explained it to Goldberg. If we could get rid of Assad, that would really help weaken Iran. Plain English. It's right there, 2012 interview in The Atlantic. No question about what their policy is. So they have made it this way. But, history began yesterday, every day, when it comes to American foreign policy. And right now, we really are talking about bin Laden reincarnate basically as the leader, as the self-proclaimed, total leader of a new state. That is no nonsense. And, if some possible atrocities against the Yazidis are enough to begin this intervention, just wait, because the Islamic State guys are some fanatical, they are really, lunatics. They are hell-bent on civil war with the Shiites. Patrick Coburn compares them to Nazis, and not in a, Noriega is the next Hitler way, but in a, no, really, these guys are fanatical. Their final solution to the Shiite problem is kill all of them. I mean, they are really like this. So if an atrocity is enough of a casus belli to get us into the war, get ready, because we got 10,000 atrocities coming this way. These ISIS guys are going to keep murdering civilians. They're going to keep murdering kids. They're going to keep crucifying people to death. They're going to keep cutting people's heads off. They're going to keep putting it on YouTube. And, as long as, oh, no, a crisis is enough for the excuse that, oh, we got to go solve it now, then there's just no stopping this thing. There's just no stopping it. And believe me, I'm the number one most against it out of everybody in the whole world. I'm not trying to say it must be done. I think that all that they can do, like I said before, the Army and the Marines fought them for years, and they could marginalize them a little bit, kill a lot of them, but then only create more, and only end up leading to a situation where now they rule all of freaking northwestern Iraq. So I think all America can do by intervening is make matters worse. And in fact, this is already happening. The Mujahideen, as soon as the bombs started falling last week, the Mujahideen said two things. First of all, they celebrated. All over the internet, the Mujahideen were saying, great, the Americans are in. This is the best PR coup that we could possibly have. Now we're not just fighting the Shia, but we're fighting the evil Americans, and which is the number one best thing that they could possibly hope for their public relations, for their purposes. That now that, in real time, they are the enemies of us. And then the second thing they said was, we vow revenge. We're coming to kill you. And the truth is that that's true. I mean, there's just no way around it. There are at least, and I'm sorry, because I know that this is war propaganda that you see on TV all the time, but this much is true. I'm not saying you should conclude what they want you to conclude, that we have to go to war. I'm saying the opposite. But it's true that there are at least 2, 3, maybe more thousand Western Europeans who have gone to fight in Syria. Again, this American and our allies supported war in Syria this whole time. They've looked the other way for the most part as these guys have traveled there to fight. One of them already, and I don't know if this was on the orders of ISIS or not. I assume not, actually. But a Frenchman came home from Syria, went to Brussels, and murdered 4 people at a Jewish museum in April. And so I think, and there was also an American suicide bomber who's from Florida, went over there, joined up with the Mujahideen, and did a suicide attack. Only last week it came out. Before he did the suicide attack, he came home. Somehow the FBI was completely unable to know who he was, what he was doing, that he was back in the country. He came and visited family and friends in Florida and said his goodbyes before he went back to Syria and killed himself in a suicide attack. He could have just as easily done that suicide attack in Florida. And do either of you guys think that the FBI is capable, if they even cared enough to try to keep us safe, do any of us believe that they have a folder full of the names of all the Americans who've gone to Turkey and may or may not have gone on to Syria to fight in the past few years? Hell no. They're too busy entrapping the retarded kid at the Islamic bookstore into some fake plot. And so I think it's just a matter of time, and it doesn't take 20 guys and 4 planes and a massive September 11th type attack. Just a competent fighter could set off a bomb in Times Square, could set up a bomb on an airplane, could take a rifle to a ball game or hijack a gasoline truck and crash it into a bunch of crowd at a fair or whatever kind of soft target. It's, if you stop and think about it for a minute, you can think of a million ways that a real-ass terrorist in this country could get away with an attack. Just look at Boston. What if that Boston bomb had been 4 or 5 times bigger? Instead of just a crock pot, it had been a few of them or something. We could be living in another post-September 11th type era of fear and blank check for more war and more intervention. And so their excuse is these guys are so many and so dangerous, we got to go to war against them. And I'm saying these guys are so many and so dangerous, we have absolutely got to stop intervening over there immediately. And we could not possibly stop intervening soon enough to try to get these guys to forget about us as much as we can and worry about their own problems that they've already got their hands full. For the American government to now direct their rage this way at this point is, I don't know if this is exactly treason, like the direct support for them, like I was saying before, but it is certainly a betrayal of the American people because they do not have the capability to prevent the retaliation that's coming. I mean, we're trusting the national police of Western Europe and North America and the CIA to prevent these guys from being able to get here. I got no trust. None.
Well, on that very scary note, I guess, thank you for your time today. What's the best way for people to follow your work?
I'm at scotthorton.org. That's my website. I keep all my interview archives there. And I'm on the Liberty Radio Network, LRN.FM, libertyradionetwork.com, every day, every weekday from noon to 3 Eastern Time. That's LRN.FM.
Okay, and what radio stations, terrestrial radio stations, does your show air on?
Well, I'm on my KPFK show, Anti-War Radio in Los Angeles, is on 90.7 FM in LA on Sunday mornings at 8:30. And then I'm also on KUCR in the Inland Empire, 88.3, and KDRT in Davis, California. And then the LRN show is rebroadcast on a couple of stations, I think in New Hampshire and Oregon, and I'm not exactly sure what other all stations pick up the Liberty Radio Network. But there's a few of them anyway.
Okay. All right, very good. Well, thank you for your time and all the information. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Sure. Thanks very much for having me, and sorry for going on so long. But
We love it. We love it.
Not a problem. It's great. It's great. We want all the details and all the information we can get.
Thank you
all right,
so
well,
much.
Thanks very much again for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast.
If you would like to listen to more episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes or subscribe on Stitcher. And check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also email us at contact@wakeupcallpodcast.com if you're interested in being interviewed for the show or have any other suggestions.
Thank you.